The letter in her hand felt heavier than the trunk at her feet, as Rebecca Zimmerman stood on the dusty platform of the Rock Springs, Wyoming train station in the summer of 1879. At 6 feet tall, she towered over most of the women disembarking alongside her, their faces alight with anticipation as they searched the crowd for their prospective husbands. Rebecca smoothed the wrinkles from her blue traveling dress, attempting to stand with the poise her mother had always insisted upon rather than slouching to minimize her height. Last call for mail order brides. Gentlemen awaiting their intended, please step forward. The station master called, his voice carrying over the hiss of the steam engine cooling behind them. Rebecca's heart quickened. Somewhere in the sea of dust, covered hats and weathered faces, stood Mr. Arthur Blackfield, the cattle rancher who had responded to her advertisement in the Marriage Gazette with such promising letters. For 6 months, they had corresponded him describing his successful ranch 10 miles outside of Rock Springs, her sharing carefully edited details of her life in Philadelphia, omitting the financial ruin that had befallen her family after her father's passing. She had not, however, mentioned her height, a detail she now feared might be problematic as she watched the other women, none taller than 5'6", being greeted by their future husbands. One by one, names were called. One by one, women stepped forward, some met with warm embraces, others with awkward handshakes, but all paired off and departing toward new lives. When only Rebecca remained, the station master consulted his list. "Miss Rebecca Zimmerman," he called, looking up with tired eyes. "Yes, that's me," she replied, stepping forward with as much dignity as she could muster. A short, barrel-chested man with a receding hairline and an impressive mustache approached, removing his hat. "Arthur Blackfield, madam. I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding." Rebecca's stomach dropped. Misunderstanding. His eyes traveled from her face downward, then back up again, a journey that seemed to take far too long. "You're not quite what I was expecting," he said, clearing his throat. "I need a practical wife, someone who won't stand out, who can fit in with the ladies in town. Someone, well, normal-sized." The words stung worse than if he'd slapped her. Rebecca had endured whispers and stares her entire life, but never such a blunt rejection. "I see," she managed, though her throat had gone dry. "I'm willing to pay your fare back to Philadelphia," Blackfield continued, not meeting her eyes. "I think that would be best for both of us." Before Rebecca could respond, a deep voice cut through the awkward silence. "Blackfield, you're a damn fool." Both Rebecca and Arthur turned toward the newcomer, a tall man, easily matching Rebecca's height, perhaps an inch or two more, strode toward them. Dust coated his denim pants and his checkered shirt had seen better days, but there was something undeniably commanding about his presence. His dark hair curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes, deep blue and unwavering, fixed on Rebecca with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Isaac Evans," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "And if you're rejecting this lady on account of her height, you've lost what little sense God gave you." Arthur Blackfield's face reddened. "This isn't your business, Evans." "Maybe not," Isaac replied. "But seems to me if a man can't appreciate a woman who can probably reach the top shelf without a stool, he doesn't deserve her cooking on his table." A small crowd had gathered now, and Rebecca felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Yet there was something in Isaac Evans' straightforward defense that kindled a spark of gratitude amidst her humiliation. "Mr. Blackfield has made his position clear," she said, striving to maintain her dignity. "And while I appreciate your intervention, Mr. Evans, I don't require charity." Isaac's eyes never left hers. "Not offering charity, madam, just observing that some men lack vision." Then, with a deliberate glance at Blackfield, he added, "You're just my height. Seems like a fine match to me." Arthur Blackfield muttered something about ungrateful women and interfering neighbors before stomping away, leaving Rebecca stranded with her trunk, her letter, and a strange cowboy who seemed entirely too comfortable inserting himself into her disaster. "Do you make a habit of inserting yourself into strangers' private matters?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Isaac shrugged. "Only when those matters are conducted at full volume in the middle of a public train station." His mouth quirked into a half-smile that softened his weathered features. "Where will you go now?" The question hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She had spent her last dollars on the train fare west, confident in the future promised in Arthur Blackfield's letters. Philadelphia held nothing for her but memories of better days and a mountain of her father's unpaid debts. "I suppose I'll seek employment in town," she said, lifting her chin. "I'm well educated. I can read, write, and keep accounts." "Rock Springs isn't known for its abundance of positions for educated women," Isaac said, his expression thoughtful. "But as it happens, I'm in need of help at my ranch. Temporary position, mind you, but it would give you time to find your feet." Rebecca narrowed her eyes. "What sort of help?" "My sister Charlotte ran my household until last month when she married the doctor over in Green River. Left me with a house I can barely manage and a ledger I can't make heads or tails of." He gestured to her trunk. "You need somewhere to stay. I need someone who can organize my accounts and maybe ensure I don't burn down the kitchen. Separate sleeping quarters, proper wages, and my word as a gentleman that you'll be treated with respect." Any proper lady would refuse such an offer from a strange man. Yet there was something about Isaac Evans, perhaps the direct way he met her gaze, or the fact that he hadn't once looked at her as though she were some oddity on display, that made Rebecca consider his proposal. "You're offering me a position as your housekeeper and bookkeeper," he added. "I've got 3 men working the ranch plus myself. We're simple folk, but the work's honest." Rebecca considered her options, which were painfully few. "I accept your offer, Mr. Evans, on a temporary basis," she said finally, "until I can secure more suitable arrangements." "Fair enough," he replied, lifting her trunk as though it weighed nothing. "My wagon's this way. Hope you don't mind a dusty ride, it's been a dry summer." As they walked toward the wagon, Rebecca couldn't help but notice how, for the first time in her adult life, she didn't have to look down to meet a man's eyes. It was a novel experience, and despite the day's humiliations, she found a small comfort in it. The journey to Isaac Evans' ranch took nearly 2 hours, the wagon bouncing over rutted dirt roads that wound through scrubby hills and across open plains dotted with sagebrush. Rebecca learned that Isaac ran a modest cattle operation that had been started by his father 15 years earlier. He'd taken over when his father died 3 years ago, and with his sister's help, had managed to turn a struggling ranch into a stable, if not prosperous, business. Charlotte was the brains, he admitted as they crested a hill that revealed a sprawling valley below. "I can handle the cattle and keep the men in line, but she kept the books and made sure we didn't spend more than we earned." In the distance, Rebecca could make out a cluster of buildings, a main house constructed of sturdy logs with a covered porch, a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse. A corral contained several horses, and beyond, she could see cattle grazing on the open range. "It's not fancy," Isaac said, following her gaze, "but it's home." "It looks lovely," Rebecca replied honestly. After the cramped apartment she'd shared with her mother in Philadelphia's declining neighborhoods, the open space and sturdy buildings represented a kind of freedom she'd never known. As they approached, 3 men emerged from the barn. One, An older man with a weathered face and silver hair waved a greeting. The other two younger men, one barely out of his teens, stared openly as Isaac helped Rebecca down from the wagon. "Boys, this is Miss Rebecca Zimmerman," Isaac announced. "She'll be keeping house and sorting out our accounts for a spell. Miss Zimmerman, meet my ranch hands. That's Hank Miller. He's my foreman." The older man nodded respectfully. "The youngster there is Billy Cooper, and the ugly one is Thomas Wright." "Madam," they each said in turn, Thomas removing his hat while Billy continued to stare. "Miss Zimmerman came west to marry Arthur Blackfield," Isaac continued, "but he proved himself an idiot, so his loss is our gain." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm at the blunt explanation, but the men seemed to take it in stride, exchanging glances that suggested they were well acquainted with Arthur Blackfield's character. "Ain't surprised," Hank commented. "Man's particular about everything from his cattle to his coffee." "No offense intended, miss." "None taken," Rebecca assured him, though the sting of rejection remained fresh. Isaac carried her trunk into the house, leading her through a simple but spacious main room that served as both parlor and dining area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while worn but clean furnishings filled the space. He showed her to a small bedroom off the main area. "Charlotte's old room," he explained. "Nothing fancy, but it's private. The washroom's out back. We've got a pump in the kitchen for water." He set her trunk down. "I'll let you get settled. Supper's usually at 6, but we can push it back if you need more time." Left alone, Rebecca sank onto the bed, the events of the day washing over her in a wave of emotion. The humiliation of Arthur Blackfield's rejection mingled with relief at finding immediate employment and uncertainty about her future. She allowed herself 5 minutes of quiet tears before squaring her shoulders, unpacking her meager belongings, and preparing to face her new life with the dignity her mother had instilled in her. When Rebecca emerged from her room, she found Isaac at the kitchen stove, prodding dubiously at something in a cast-iron skillet. "I believe that bacon is beyond saving," she observed, moving to his side. Isaac glanced up, a sheepish expression crossing his face. "Was trying to get dinner started." "Charlotte always made it look so easy." Rebecca rolled up her sleeves. "Perhaps I should take over." "Gladly," he replied, stepping aside. "Supplies are in the pantry. We're simple eaters, Miss Zimmerman. Don't go to any special trouble." Within an hour, Rebecca had assembled a respectable meal of beans, cornbread, and fresh sliced tomatoes from the small garden behind the house. The ranch hands filed in at 6 o'clock, washing up at the pump, before taking their places at the large oak table. "This is a sight better than what we've been eating," Billy declared, shoveling beans into his mouth with enthusiasm. "The boss burns water." "Mind your manners," Hank chided, though he too ate with appreciation. "Miss Zimmerman doesn't need to hear about our culinary suffering." Isaac watched Rebecca throughout the meal, his expression thoughtful. "You didn't mention you could cook," he said as the men helped clear the table. "You didn't ask," she replied, "but I've been keeping house since my mother fell ill 3 years ago." A look of understanding crossed his face. "Is your mother?" "She passed last winter," Rebecca said simply. "There was nothing left for me in Philadelphia." Isaac nodded, accepting her explanation without prying further. "The account books are in my father's old desk. Whenever you're ready to look them over, they're all yours. Fair warning, they're a mess." "I'll start tomorrow," she promised. That night, lying in the narrow bed that had belonged to Isaac's sister, Rebecca stared at the ceiling and wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. She had come west expecting to be a rancher's wife, only to be rejected for the very trait she couldn't control. Now she found herself the housekeeper for a different rancher, one who stood eye to eye with her and hadn't once made her feel like an oddity. It was not the future she had planned, but as she drifted off to sleep, the open Wyoming sky visible through her window, Rebecca acknowledged that perhaps it wasn't such a terrible beginning after all. The following weeks established a routine that brought order to both Rebecca's life and the Evans ranch. She rose early, preparing breakfast for Isaac and the hands before they headed out to work. Mornings were spent cleaning and organizing the house, which had fallen into a state of bachelor disarray in Charlotte's absence. Afternoons found her at the desk in the corner of the main room, untangling the mess of Isaac's accounts. "Your sister was remarkably organized," Rebecca commented one evening as Isaac reviewed the ledger she'd reconstructed. "But you've been operating at a loss for months." Isaac ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Rebecca had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "I feared as much. The droughts hit the herd hard. We lost too many calves in the spring." "You need to diversify," she suggested tentatively, aware she was overstepping her role as housekeeper. "Perhaps consider selling some of your land to the railroad. They're expanding the line from Rock Springs, and according to the newspaper, they're paying good money for the right parcels." He looked up sharply. "Sell my father's land. Just the northernmost section," she clarified, pointing to a crude map on the wall. "It's the rockiest part of your range, less suitable for grazing. The money could tide you over until next year's calving season and allow you to dig a new well closer to the house." Isaac studied her for a long moment. "You've given this considerable thought." "I've had little else to occupy my mind," she admitted, "and I've always had a head for numbers." "Clearly," he said, his expression softening. "I'll consider it." As July turned to August, the heat intensified, baking the land until it cracked beneath their feet. Rebecca found herself spending more time with Isaac, as he sought her counsel on ranch matters that extended beyond keeping the books. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors while discussing cattle prices, grazing strategies, and the politics of water rights in the territory. "You know more about ranching than most men born to it," he remarked one evening as they watched a thunderstorm roll across the distant hills, bringing much-needed rain that would likely miss their parched land. Rebecca smiled. "My father was a businessman. He taught me that principles remain the same regardless of the industry. Understand your resources, minimize your risks, and plan for the worst while working toward the best." "Wise man," Isaac said, his arm resting casually on the back of the porch swing they shared. "He was," she agreed, feeling the familiar pang of loss. "Until he wasn't. He gambled everything on a shipping venture that sank in the Atlantic, lost his business, our home, and ultimately his will to live." Isaac's hand moved to cover hers briefly. "I'm sorry." "So am I," she replied, allowing herself to lean slightly against his solid presence. "But I'm learning that sometimes life takes unexpected turns, like ending up as a bookkeeper on a struggling cattle ranch instead of a rancher's wife." His tone was light, but his eyes were serious when she turned to meet them. "Exactly like that," she said softly. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, until a crack of thunder broke the spell. They retreated inside as the storm finally reached them, bringing a deluge that had them both laughing as they raced to close windows and collect buckets where the roof leaked. In the lamplight, with rain drumming on the roof and water dripping into strategically placed buckets, Rebecca realized she had not thought of Arthur Blackfield's rejection in days. The humiliation that had once seemed unbearable had faded into a distant memory, replaced by the satisfaction of making herself useful, and, increasingly, by her awareness of Isaac Evans as more than simply her employer. The next morning, Rebecca was kneading dough for the day's bread when a wagon pulled into the yard. Through the kitchen window, she saw a well-dressed woman descend, assisted by Isaac, who had been mending a fence nearby. Rebecca wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch just as Isaac escorted the visitor toward the house. "Miss Zimmerman," he called, "allow me to introduce my sister, Mrs. Charlotte Evans Parker. Charlotte, this is Miss Rebecca Zimmerman, who's been keeping us from descending into complete chaos." Charlotte Parker was a petite woman with Isaac's blue eyes and an openly curious expression. "Miss Zimmerman," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I've heard so much about you from my brother's letters. He says you've worked miracles with his accounts." "Hardly miracles," Rebecca replied, aware of flour still dusting her hands and a strand of hair escaping her normally tidy bun. "Your system was excellent. I merely picked up where you left off." "Nonsense," Charlotte insisted, linking arms with Rebecca as though they were old friends. "Isaac writes that you've suggested selling that useless rocky section to the railroad, a brilliant idea I've been pushing for years." Isaac cleared his throat. "Charlotte's come to collect some items she left behind and to ensure we haven't burned down the house in her absence." "The house is standing," Rebecca assured her, "though the roof leaks something terrible when it rains." Charlotte laughed. "It always has. Father meant to fix it, then Isaac meant to fix it. I suspect it will still be leaking when the house finally crumbles to dust." The women fell into easy conversation as Rebecca showed Charlotte the improvements she'd made to the house: curtains sewn from fabric found in a trunk, shelves reorganized for efficiency. A small herb garden started behind the kitchen. Isaac excused himself to return to his fence mending, leaving them to become acquainted. "He looks well," Charlotte observed as they sat at the kitchen table sharing tea. "When I left, I feared he'd work himself into an early grave trying to manage everything alone." "He works very hard," Rebecca agreed. Charlotte studied her over the rim of her cup. "And what of you, Miss Zimmerman? Isaac mentioned in his letters that you came west as a mail-order bride." Rebecca tensed slightly. "Yes, though it didn't work out as planned." "Arthur Blackfield," Charlotte said with undisguised contempt. "A man so concerned with appearances he can't see true worth when it's standing before him. You know him." "Everyone in Rock Springs knows Arthur Blackfield," Charlotte replied. "He's been through 3 housekeepers in the past year because none could meet his exacting standards. The man even sends his shirts to Denver for proper laundering." Despite herself, Rebecca laughed. "Perhaps I had a fortunate escape." "Indeed you did," Charlotte agreed, her expression turning more serious. "And perhaps my brother had a fortunate find." Before Rebecca could respond to the implied question in Charlotte's statement, the door burst open and Isaac entered, his expression grim. "Rustlers," he announced. "They've taken at least 20 head from the south pasture. Hank's following their trail, but we need to ride out now if we're going to catch them before they cross into Colorado." Charlotte stood immediately. "I'll stay with Rebecca. Go." Isaac nodded, pausing only to grab his rifle from above the door. "Bar the doors after dark," he instructed. "We may be gone overnight." "Be careful," Rebecca called after him, a sudden fear gripping her heart. "Always am," he replied with a quick smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. After he left, Charlotte helped Rebecca finish preparing the bread, then insisted on showing her how to use Isaac's rifle. "Just in case," she explained, demonstrating how to load and fire the weapon. "Rustlers don't usually bother with ranch houses, but better safe than sorry." They spent the evening talking, Charlotte sharing stories of growing up on the ranch with Isaac and their parents, painting a picture of a close-knit family bound by hard work and mutual respect. "Our mother died when I was 12, she explained. "Isaac was 15. We learned to manage together, though Father never quite recovered from losing her. Your brother speaks of him with great admiration, Rebecca observed. As he should. Father built this ranch from nothing. Charlotte's expression grew thoughtful. But Isaac has his own strengths. He understands this land and these cattle better than anyone. What he lacks is someone to share the burden, someone who sees his worth beyond just being a rancher. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm under Charlotte's knowing gaze. I'm merely his employee, she said carefully. For now, Charlotte replied with a smile. But I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching, and I suspect, Miss Zimmerman, that you might look at him the same way. Rebecca didn't deny it. How could she, when in just a few short weeks Isaac Evans had become central to her thoughts? His quiet strength, his integrity, his acceptance of her exactly as she was all had conspired to create feelings she hadn't expected and wasn't sure how to navigate. Even if that were true, she said finally, my position here is temporary. I came west to be a wife, not a housekeeper. Perhaps you might yet be both, Charlotte suggested gently. They retired early, Charlotte taking Isaac's room while Rebecca lay awake in her own bed, listening to the night sounds of the ranch and wondering where Isaac was, whether he was safe, and what the future might hold when he returned. Morning brought no sign of Isaac or the ranch hands, and by midday, both women were struggling to hide their concern. Charlotte busied herself with collecting the personal items she'd come for, while Rebecca cleaned the kitchen with unnecessary thoroughness. When hoofbeats finally sounded in the yard, they both rushed to the door. Isaac dismounted wearily, his clothes dusty and a day's growth of beard shadowing his jaw. Behind him, Hank and Thomas rode double on one horse, while Billy led another with a body draped across the saddle. We recovered the cattle, Isaac announced, his voice gravel rough with exhaustion. But Billy took a bullet in the shoulder. Thomas, take him to the bunkhouse. Hank, ride into town for the doctor. As the men followed his instructions, Rebecca hurried to Isaac's side. Are you hurt? Just tired, he assured her, though she noticed he winced as he removed his hat. We tracked the rustlers to the border, got into a firefight. They ran, but not before one of them got a shot off at Billy. And the man on the horse? Charlotte asked, nodding toward the body. One of the rustlers, Isaac replied grimly. Killed in the exchange, we couldn't leave him for the wolves. Rebecca shuddered, the reality of Western justice suddenly very present. Come inside, she urged Isaac. You need to rest, and I'll prepare hot water for you to wash. He followed her without protest, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table while Rebecca heated water and Charlotte prepared a quick meal. When she brought him a basin of warm water and a clean cloth, Rebecca noticed blood matting his hair above his right ear. You are hurt, she accused, tilting his head to examine the wound. Bullet grazed me, he admitted. It's nothing. It's not nothing, Rebecca insisted, carefully cleaning the dried blood from his temple. The wound wasn't deep, but it had bled profusely as head wounds tend to do. You could have been killed. Hazard of ranching in these parts, he replied, though his expression softened at her concern. But I'm touched by your worry, Miss Zimmerman. Rebecca, she corrected him softly. After all this time, I think you might call me Rebecca. His eyes met hers, the weariness in them momentarily replaced by something warmer. Rebecca, he repeated, as though testing the sound of it. Then you must call me Isaac. Charlotte cleared her throat, reminding them of her presence. I think I'll check on young Billy, she announced, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she left them alone. Rebecca finished cleaning Isaac's wound, her fingers gentle against his skin. You should rest, she told him, reluctantly stepping back. Soon, he promised. But first, there's something I need to say. Her heart quickened. Yes. When we were pinned down by those rustlers, bullets flying over our heads, all I could think about was getting back here. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping hers. "Getting back to you." "Isaac," she breathed, unsure what else to say as hope blossomed in her chest. "I know you came west to be Arthur Blackfield's wife, and I know working as my housekeeper wasn't what you planned." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But these past weeks, having you here, talking with you, seeing how you understand this land and this life. I can't imagine the ranch without you now." Rebecca felt tears gathering in her eyes. "Are you offering me permanent employment?" A smile broke across his tired face. "No, Rebecca. I'm wondering if, given time, you might consider a more permanent arrangement altogether." Before she could respond, the door swung open, and Charlotte returned with news that Billy was settled comfortably and Hank had departed for town. The moment between Rebecca and Isaac stretched, unresolved but filled with promise, as life on the ranch resumed its urgent pace around them. The doctor arrived 2 hours later, tending to Billy's wound and pronouncing it painful but not life-threatening. He examined Isaac's head as well, prescribed rest, and left instructions for care before departing with a reminder that he'd return in 3 days to check on his patients. Charlotte announced that she would stay until Billy was well enough to resume his duties, a decision that relieved Rebecca, even as she wondered if it would delay further conversation with Isaac about their future. That evening, however, as Charlotte prepared a sleeping draught for Billy, Isaac asked Rebecca to join him on the porch. The setting sun bathed the ranch in golden light, the distant mountains purple against the darkening sky. Rebecca stood at the railing, aware of Isaac beside her, his presence as solid and reassuring as the land stretching before them. "I meant what I said earlier," he began, his voice low. "Having you here has changed everything." Rebecca turned to face him. "When I came west, I thought I knew what I wanted: security, a home, a purpose. Arthur Blackfield seemed to offer those things. And now I know I wanted something else entirely," she admitted. "I wanted to be seen for who I am, not judged for how I appear. I wanted respect, yes, but also—" She hesitated, gathering her courage. "Also affection, partnership, the chance to build something meaningful alongside someone who values me completely." Isaac stepped closer, his hand finding hers again. "I see you, Rebecca Zimmerman. All 6 feet of you, with your brilliant mind and your kind heart and your ability to make this house feel like a home again. And I find myself hoping that you might see me too, not just as your employer, but as a man who's falling in love with you." The words she'd longed to hear hung in the air between them, more beautiful than any sunset. "I do see you," she whispered. "The man who defended me to a stranger, who offered me a place when I had nowhere to go, who treats me as an equal and values my thoughts. Is that enough?" He asked, vulnerability evident in his eyes. "This ranch isn't much compared to what you might have had in Philadelphia before your father's troubles." Rebecca laughed softly. "This ranch is everything I never knew I wanted. And you, Isaac Evans, are the man I never dared hope to find." He drew her closer, one hand coming up to cradle her cheek. "I'm going to kiss you now," he murmured, "if that's acceptable to you." "Entirely acceptable," she replied, her heart racing as his lips met hers in a gentle kiss that deepened as she responded, her arms slipping around his neck. When they finally parted, Isaac rested his forehead against hers, their heights perfectly matched. "Arthur Blackfield is the biggest fool in Wyoming territory," he declared. "Perhaps we should thank him," Rebecca suggested. "If he hadn't rejected me, I would never have found my way here. To this struggling ranch with a leaky roof and rustlers at the borders. To you," she corrected him softly. "To a man who looked at me and said you're just my height instead of seeing a problem." Isaac's laugh rumbled through his chest. "I've always appreciated practical advantages." Do you know how convenient it is not to need a stool to reach the top shelves? Rebecca joined in his laughter, feeling lighter than she had in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and running a ranch in the Wyoming Territory, guaranteed there would be many, she would face them standing tall beside the man who saw her height not as a flaw, but as a perfect match to his own. As September yielded to October, preparations for winter occupied every waking hour. Billy recovered from his wound, though he complained dramatically whenever assigned tasks that taxed his shoulder. Charlotte returned to Green River with promises to visit again when travel was easier, leaving behind a knowing smile and a whispered blessing for Rebecca's future with her brother. The rustler's body had been buried on the ranch, a simple wooden cross marking the grave, while the local sheriff investigated the gang's activities. 2 more members were eventually captured near Laramie, bringing a measure of security back to the area ranchers. Through it all, Rebecca and Isaac's relationship deepened. Their evenings on the porch became a cherished ritual, a time to discuss the day's events and share their hopes for the future. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above the vast Wyoming landscape, their hands entwined and their shoulders touching. In late October, Isaac rode into Rock Springs and returned with news that the railroad had agreed to purchase the rocky northern section of the ranch at a price nearly double what Rebecca had suggested it might be worth. "They're planning a spur line," he explained as they celebrated over a special dinner she'd prepared. "That rocky terrain is perfect for their needs, and we'll still have grazing rights on the land until construction begins next spring." "That's wonderful," Rebecca exclaimed. "You'll be able to dig the new well and repair the roof before winter sets in." "And I've been thinking," Isaac continued, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "that perhaps we might expand the house as well. Add a proper parlor, maybe a study for you to manage the accounts." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a significant investment in the future." "It is," he agreed, reaching into his pocket and producing a small velvet box. "A future I'm hoping we'll share." Her breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "Isaac, Rebecca Zimmerman, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" he asked, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know it's only been a few months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Tears of joy blurred her vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Nothing would make me happier." The ring fit perfectly as he slid it onto her finger, and the kiss they shared was a promise of all the days to come. That night, as they sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill, Rebecca leaned her head on Isaac's shoulder. "You realize," she mused, "that if we have daughters they're likely to be tall." Isaac chuckled. "I should hope so. Tall women make the best ranchers' wives in my experience." "Your experience being limited to one," she teased. "The only one that matters," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Rock Springs, Charlotte standing as Rebecca's witness and Hank serving as Isaac's best man. The ceremony was simple, but the celebration afterward at the ranch was joyful, with neighbors from miles around coming to congratulate the couple who stood eye to eye as they exchanged their vows. Arthur Blackfield was notably absent from the festivities, though Rebecca heard from Charlotte that he'd recently advertised for another mail-order bride with specific requirements, including a height restriction. "His loss," Isaac said when he heard, drawing Rebecca close. "Though I can't say I'm sorry for how things turned out." "Nor am I," she agreed, settling comfortably into his embrace. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow and confining them largely to the house. which now boasted a repaired roof, and the beginnings of an addition that would be completed in spring. The forced intimacy of those winter months cemented their partnership, as they shared not only their lives but their dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. By spring, as the snow melted and new calves appeared in the pastures, Rebecca had news of her own to share. Standing in the doorway of the newly constructed study, where Isaac was reviewing the accounts she still managed, she cleared her throat to gain his attention. "I believe we'll need to consider adding another bedroom to our expansion plans," she announced, her hand resting unconsciously on her still flat stomach. Isaac looked up sharply, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Are you certain?" "As certain as one can be," she replied, a smile blooming on her face. "Dr. Parker confirmed it yesterday when he came to check on Thomas's broken arm." Isaac crossed the room in 3 strides, gathering her into his arms with a whoop of joy that brought the ranch hands running from the barn, convinced something was amiss. When Isaac announced the news, cheers erupted, and Hank declared an impromptu holiday from afternoon chores. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the spring sunset, Isaac's hand rested protectively over Rebecca's middle. "Boy or girl, this child will be loved," he promised. "And if it's a girl," Rebecca added, "and she grows to be as tall as her mother, then she'll be exactly as she should be," Isaac replied firmly. "Perfect." Rebecca leaned against him, contentment washing over her as she contemplated the journey that had brought her to this place from the desperate young woman willing to marry a stranger to escape financial ruin, to the wife and soon-to-be mother who had found not just security but profound happiness on a Wyoming cattle ranch. "I used to hate my height," she confessed. "All those years of standing out, of never quite fitting in. And now I'm grateful for every inch," she said, turning to meet his gaze, "because it brought me to you." "To us," he corrected gently, kissing her with a tenderness that still made her heart race. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, making plans for their growing family and the expanding ranch. The future stretched before them, as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky, a future built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the perfect match of 2 people who stood eye to eye in life and in love. Their daughter, Eleanor, was born the following November, a healthy, strong, lunged infant who already showed signs of inheriting her parents' height. 2 years later, she was joined by a brother, James, equally robust and tall for his age. The Evans Ranch prospered under their joint management, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in Sweetwater County. And whenever Rebecca encountered the occasional raised eyebrow or curious glance at her unusual height, she would smile, thinking of the day a dusty cowboy had stepped forward on a train platform and declared, "You're just my height," the words that had changed the course of her life and led her to a happiness greater than she had ever dared to dream.